All right, so other thing I wanted to say up front is, as I mentioned, I found a lot of sources that I had to pull little pieces from to put this together. So when I publish this, or if it ever goes more public, I'll have to put a lot more people who donate, like a bibliography as to where I found everything, because there's little bits and pieces of good things in lots of people's documents. And people have been writing about the Wigner family and the Wigner wineries in the high schools for years, as well as every single historian has written about the wine business and the wine and the grape business of Naples. So if you read through all the historical articles by either Bill Verheil, Bob Verheil, all the other historians, you find out there's little pieces and nuggets in everything. And as I mentioned, I even managed to get the memoirs of John Jacob Wigner, and he actually documented the story of how he came here. And I've heard all these different stories for the last 6 years as I've been in Naples, but none of them match the real story that he wrote in his own memoirs. So it's very interesting. So the memoirs were translated by his daughter, and so I found those in the archives in the library. All right, so the history of winemaking in Naples. And I say part one because I only had time to take us up to 1968 or so at the time when Wigner sold their winery. There is a lot of information just to get to that point from the beginning to there. And so after that, then we'll get into some of the other wineries that happened after that. The other thing is that as far as things I've learned, and maybe you'll learn the same thing, is that it's really, when people come to the end, they say, what happened in Naples that allowed people to afford such beautiful homes and build all this inside being so isolated? And I used to say, well, it's the mountains and the water power and all that, and so, they cut down the wood and they floated up Canandaigua Lake and built Canandaigua out of Naples woods and all this kind of stuff. But really, I think now it was more the grape industry that really, really made this town what it is. Okay, the other things were important too. So I tried to summarize on this chart definitions and time frames, because some people talk about vineyards, then there's commercial graperies, and then there's wineries. And depending on what you're talking about, you can come up with different dates and different people started different things. So I broke it also into things that happened in the United States, things that happened in the Finger Lakes, and then the things that happened in the Naples Valley. So if we talk about vineyards, so the first vineyard in the United States was 1829, Samuel Warm, Genesee River Valley, which is right next to here. The first vineyard in the Finger Lakes, 1832, J.W. Prentice, Keuka Lake. The first vineyard in Naples Valley, 1848, McKay. But see, if you see all these little asterisks. So let's go to the John J.W. Prentice one first. J.W. Prentice took cuttings from Reverend William Bostic of Hammondsport, who in 1829 had planted vines in his backyard. So while he started the first vineyard, this guy planted some vines in his backyard, but didn't call it a vineyard, just planted some vines. Same thing with McKay and Naples. And there's been a lot of discussion about this, but the first grapevines were brought to Naples actually by J.L. Monier in 1840, but were used ornamentally over an arbor. And Mr. McKay, and I'll get into more detail on this, decided that maybe he could grow grapes, and he took cuttings from J.L. Monier. Some other people tried to take credit for his success at building his first vineyard. He built it on Lyon Street. Lyon was involved. The guy who gave him the fertilizer, which was kind of some dead animals that he had, he took credit for the vineyard, but really it was Mr. McKay. From all the articles that I read through all the old newspapers, and let's keep going. Okay, so then again, in the United States. So really, vineyards started in the United States in this area. It was either right next door to us, Finger Lakes or Naples Valley. This is really where it all happened. It was right here. It was pretty cool. It wasn't California. It wasn't halfway across the country. It wasn't South Carolina. It was here. Let's talk about commercial graperies. Then the idea is, okay, we can grow some grapes, but let's make money. So Samuel Warm in the Genesee River Valley immediately started to turn into graperies and start selling the grapes. In the Finger Lakes, J.W. Prentice did it, but A. Riesinger, who was also from Naples, started doing it, and again, it was in the Keuka Lake area. The first time we actually sold, at least documentedly sold commercial grapes in Naples Valley was Mr. Riesinger again, who really also had a place over in Keuka, Mr. Dinsler on Rhine Street, and the Naples Valley Vineyards, which Maxfield gets all the credit for, but really Mr. Clark started the vineyard and Mr. Maxfield bought it later on. And that was really interesting to find that out, which makes sense. It's on Clark Street. So Mr. Clark Street planted the vineyard. He started, and he worked with Mr. Maxfield to convert it to a commercial grapery. Then let's talk about, okay, wine. Now, that's different than graperies. You can sell grape and raspberries and everything else all you want, but you're not making wine out of it, even though the articles I read said that, well, actually, grape juice turns into wine juice. Making wine that actually tastes good during that process is the trick to wineries. And I thought, well, that's true, okay. And I know apple cider goes like that, right? So as far as wineries, again, 1832, Samuel Warren. So Samuel Warren planted first vines in 1829 for sacramental and personal use. First vintage was 1832. He sold wines in 1836. So he was way ahead of the game. That's why I had to say 832 to 836, because he actually started to give them to the churches and stuff. In the Finger Lakes, 1860, Cayuga Lake. And then Naples Valley, 1882, Naples Valley Vineyards. In that case, Maxfield gets credit for it, because at that point he became a bonded winery. So that slide is my best summary. Now I can get into some of the detail. We talked about Finger Lakes graperies. Cayuga Lake is the birthplace of Finger Lakes grape culture, 1836. That was on the last slide. If you can see, this is actually a picture, 1865 of the vineyard. That was there, right there on the lake. That's called, they used to call it the Crooked Lake, that's what they call it today, Cayuga Lake. By 1859, it was estimated that 400 to 500 acres of vineyards surrounded Cayuga Lake. There's 10,000 acres today. I don't know, today might have been 1960. It takes roughly 3 years for the new wines to start producing. So when they put the vines in, they can't really get any grapes for 3 years. So by 1860, the vineyards were mature enough to start producing wine, and in some cases did. By 1900, there were 20 wineries operating in the Hammondsport area. So in this particular area, again, it really took place, as far as the Finger Lakes, it really took place in Cayuga. So Prentice's Vineyards at Pulteney in around 1865. So there's shows you that picture. So okay, so now let's talk about the vineyards and graperies in Naples, and we'll dig a little deeper. And this is Justin Connor. I don't know if he's local, but he takes some beautiful pictures of this area. I'm astounded by some of the pictures he took. So this is the story of the Naples now. So this would be starting out with the vines, and starting out with then the graperies, and then starting out with then creating the vineyards. So this article came from an article in the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle in 1922. It was then repeated pretty much word for word in the Naples Record in 1932. But people scoffed at an idea of vineyard in this climate when a villager sent out his wines in 1840. So Naples is the heart of the grape industry and claims the distinction of introducing grapes into the lake districts of western New York. Of course, we know Cayuga was kind of there, but that's okay. It was about the same time. In 1840, James Almonier, returning from a visit to New York and New Jersey, brought a half-dozen grapevines of 3 varieties: the Sweetwater, the Isabella, and the Catawba. He planted these vines in his garden in the village, where they all bore well except the Sweetwater, a little white grape. 4 years later, E.A. McKay procured cuttings from Mr. Monier and set out 1/4 of an acre in his garden in Main Street. People scoffed at the idea of raising grapes in this climate, but the fruit did well, and Mr. McKay set out 1 acre of vines near the spot, which is now Lehigh Valley Radio. Actually, Lion Street is really where he did it. So that documents how it started. Then if you actually look at the 1859 map that we do all have, you can see his little vineyard here in 1859. It's called Little Grape House. There's Lion Street. This is his. And by the way, well, that's what it says. The first Naples Valley vineyard is attributed to Ed McKay. 1848, he planted 168 grapevines near his home on Lion Street. He lived in the Octagon House, built the Octagon House. It's still there. This attracted others to the area from Germany, like Andrew Riesinger. Remember, Andrew Riesinger was on the chart of what happened in Cayuga. He also came here, who was attributed to putting the grape growing industry in Naples and Cayuga eras on a commercial footing. So he actually helped both Cayuga and us both developed it pretty much at the same time. Riesinger, a vine dresser, planted many varieties of grapes. He trained, pruned, and tilled his vines. He terraced the Naples hillsides like he had done along the Rhine River back in Germany. All new techniques to the Finger Lakes area. Of course, it worked really well here because first McKay just planted everything flat. Didn't realize you can actually terrace all this. So Andrew Riesinger and Philip Denzler, another German who settled in the Naples Valley in 1854, are credited with establishing the commercial grape industry in the Naples area. Their high grape yields created a grape rush, like a gold rush. There was a lot of money in the Naples Valley. Really, seriously, it was tremendous. By 1860, the grape boom was on in Naples. A bearing acre produced $1,000, which is $31,000 today. By 1870, there were 800 acres of grapes in cultivation in Naples and growing every year. So that's $15 million, $700,000 worth of grapes in 1870 in our dollars. That's huge. By 1860, the grape boom was on in Naples. A bearing acre produced 1,030, that's the same thing, sorry. By 1870, there were 800 acres of grapes cultivating. I did that, look at that. I was supposed to delete this. Several factors helped to maintain the momentum of the grape rush. Improved transportation. Trains, lake steamers, and the Erie Canal provided low-cost, fast transportation of fresh New York State Naples grapes throughout the East Coast. Canandaigua Lake steamers took the grapes to the Canandaigua Pier, where the grapes were transshipped via rail. And I remember this picture. There's the old Linda, and there's the train. And that train used to go down to get the grapes. You know, I saw that back, I don't know, 20 years ago at the archives in Rochester, thinking, how cool is that? Why was there a train on the pier? But now I know. Where the grapes were transshipped via rail markets to Boston, New York City, Rochester, and Buffalo. And so this is the Maxfield Grapery, because he called it the Naples Valley Vineyard. See the view of the Naples Valley right here. But he didn't call it the Maxfield Winery. Actually, he didn't call it, when Hiram Maxfield was alive, it was never called the Maxfield Winery. It was called the Naples Valley Wine Cellars. And so, but then I found this article, Oldest Firm in Naples, that talks about all the old firms in Naples, but then it has this thing that says the vineyards which have been owned and operated by Maxfield Wine Cellars Incorporated for half a century were established in 1858, but the founder was Warner Clark, who opened it under his name. So Maxfield, you know, kind of credit for that, because Maxfield actually didn't really get into this until about the 1870s, and I had to prove that to myself, because obviously I'm a Maxfield fan.
Wayne, tell people where that's
I'm sorry.
located, because they might not know.
Right.
Some of us know, but...
So I would say Joseph's is right here. This barn is the one that got burned down, I guess the dollar store's here. This is Clark Street.
Where's my house?
Yeah, some of these were
It's
torn.
behind those trees on
Like
the
this
side.
house, we had a guy here looking for that house, and that was now with brick.
So it's behind Middletown, going up the hill.
It
Yeah,
is.
this is right. You're going up the hill further. Then, you know, there's some vines here and stuff, but you can see this is what's now the woodshed, the workshop, or the wood shop that makes furniture. That's the Maxfield Winery. This is a really old picture of it, because actually it's been much expanded since then. You know, I had everything in the same place. So then I started looking, okay, so there's the Clark Street we were just looking at. You can see here, there's no mention of Maxfield Vineyards or Graperies. This was Clark Street, this was Clark's Grapery. If you go to the 1859 Naples map, it talks about who's doing what. It says Hiram Maxfield was a man of leisure. He was a politician. But then I also found in the life sketches of members of legislature, Hiram Maxfield's story about him was written because he became somebody that was in the Senate or something. And he says he went into business at Naples, and after selling goods for several years became a mill owner, which is true. He was partial owner of the Ontario Mill, which is now where Crosby's is. Since then, he has been a general speculator dealing in produce, grain, wool, and other articles associated with that mill. For several years also, he has been known as an operator in loans and securities. He is a shrewd yet conscientious businessman and enjoys a high reputation, integrity, and fair dealing. The reason that's also really good to me to know is that means that he was dealing from the Maxfield Inn, because some people say that that was the first bank in Naples.
Right.
But then he didn't really move into the Lion Street over here, or he didn't move into the Lewis block, which is right down here, the one I'm restoring those corbels on, until 1882. That's when he established the Maxfield Bank. So this was written in 1876, and he's already dealing. I found old places where he was taking people to court, where he was selling, you know, people were taking loans for property. So I was able to prove that the Maxfield Inn really was the place he was doing business from, and that's what Bruce Gelser said. But anyway, so this helps prove that, but it doesn't mention graperies anywhere. But when I did move forward into the 1874 map, now you can see that he owns, it says Hiram Maxfield Grape House. Hiram Maxfield Grapery. So by 1874, he was on the map as a grapery guy. So that's probably when he transferred over and bought over Clark's Grapery. But of course, on the bottles, they all say 1858. But that goes all the way back to Clark. It's not necessarily the fact that he's, anyway, I see that happen. So anyway, so then the other big piece of the pie that's new to me, okay, so you got the Maxfield Grapery, the Maxfield vines, we know who started all of this. But because of the growing grape industry here, there was a steady influx of Swiss and German immigrants to Naples. In 1786, there were so many vineyards on the west, this is 1876, sorry, on the west hillside that the road was named Rhine Street. These immigrants were mostly Catholics and requested a Roman Catholic priest from the Rochester diocese. These Swiss and German built the first Catholic church in Naples, St. Januarius, where services started in 1876. By 1900, 30% of the Naples population was either Swiss or German descent. So I gotta turn this on. So this Rhine Street was named after, of course, the Rhine River. And so that was right up, you go up the big hill, and that whole area was all grapes, and that's where the Swiss and German immigrated to. So history of winemaking in the Finger Lakes, part one. So for those of you that don't know how to make wine, which I didn't really even know how when I started, so you harvest the grapes, you extract the juice, you ferment, which I understand from Tim's family over at Inspire More that this is the biggest, most important step as far as what kind of yeast and stuff you use. Then from pressure, you filtration, you age, you bottle, and then consumption. Or I don't even know Then I've seen all these charts all around, but I thought, well, I ought to at least collect all the different grapes that they grew here. So they grew the Delaware, which are these kind of grapes. They grew Niagara. They grew Catalbra. We already talked about Concord. Those were the main ones. But then when I went through some of the grape books, Maxfield actually had special grapes. He had the Clinton, the Elvira, the Isabella. So these were what the grapes look like. So they do look kind of different. I mean, these are all bundled together. And those are the grapes that they grew here. So the transition from growing grapes to wine. Wine production got started as a family affair, and there was stiff competition to go after the market. And the family affair, a lot of that was up on Rhine Street. By 1880s, there were 9 wineries operating in the Naples Valley by the Graffs, the Rowlands, the Millers, the Thralls, the Disners, the Foxes, the Cellars, the Maxfields, and the Wigners. You wouldn't believe how long it took me to find that one sentence. Because I knew there had to be more, because everybody I talked to said, well, my grandfather used to, because people would come into Naples and they'd ask me questions about the history of their family. Well, we had a vineyard up on Rhine Street. I'm like, well, who are you? Well, I'm Mr. Kahn. It was and then we worked with the, so these are the actual people, of which we only really hear about the Widmers, sometimes the Maxfields. These superior family wines were in great demand. Wine production in Naples grew from 100 gallons in 1850 to 17,000 gallons in 1899.
Wow.
Again, this is just to show you. Now so then in about 1860, New York State thought they better get involved and start bonding these places to check what people are selling. So the Pleasant Valley Wine Company, 1860, got bonded as the #1 winery, the first one. Then there was the Brotherhood Winery. This one's still in operation today. It's the oldest winery still in operation, the Brotherhood Winery. That's down south of here. Then Maxfield was #6 in 1861. Taylor Wine Company was #17, and Wigner was #43. So it gives you an idea that Maxfield really was, on the game there, trying to get himself bonded. All right, so I was only able to really find evidence of these three wineries in Naples. So, of course, the Naples Valley Wine Cellars, that's really the Maxfield one. The first winery at Canandaigua Lake was owned and operated by Hiram Maxfield in 1882. That's when he also got bonded. Hiram built a 3-story building on Clark Street hillside, which is an extension of the one that I showed you. The wine was sold under the Naples Valley Wine Cellars label. Maxfield cornered the Buffalo immigrant ghetto market who needed wine. So in that time frame, people were coming through Ellis Island, they were taking the trains north. The last stop on the train was Buffalo, and my great-grandfather worked on that train, and step-great-grandfather, and his son which my grandfather used to tell me that they used to kick him off the train. So this is the last stop, you're not going back to New York City, get off the train. So Buffalo, they started to form these ghettos of Italians and Germans and all this. And of course, when they got there in the 1880s, they go, where's the wine? You guys do grapes, where's the wine, where's the wine? So Maxfield cornered that market, and that's why later you'll see pictures where he built these special carts. You can transport these big wine casks. You had 3 horses to pull the carts up and right down the hills. The Graff wine cellars, which I never heard of until I started this report for you guys. George Graff founded the Graff Wine Cellars north of Naples, maybe it was South Bristol, around 1886, not long after he immigrated to the Naples Valley from Germany. He was still making well-regarded wine when the Milliken report on the town in the history of Ontario County, so that would have been around 1915 or so, he was still making wine. So I'd never heard of them, but they were here. And then of course the Wigner wine cellars. In October 1882, John Jacob Wigner bought his first plot of hillside woodland with borrowed money. I heard he tried to get the money from Maxfield. Well, wait till you hear the rest of that story. Because I've heard it both ways. Of course, the Maxfield family history says, and Maxfield let him have all the money he wanted. Hiram Maxfield was like that. But then when I read the rest of the people's reports, it's like, no, Maxfield wouldn't give him a dime. He doesn't want competition. But neither of those stories were really true. So that wasn't how it would happen. So anyway, he cleared and planted his first vines in 1883. The homestead itself was built in 1885 with the basement carefully planned for production of wine. It was here that the Wigner wine business started in 1888. And I'll get you into a little bit more detail there.
And that's the house for sale? Like by
No,
Wigner's
that's the
right now?
second one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll show you in a minute, yeah. That was the one he built in like 1915, the one that just got sold actually.
Oh, good.
But the old homestead's still there too. It's closer to the winery, it's the white building. So Naples Valley Wine Cellars, and that's just a picture of some of the Naples Valley. So those of you that know my inn, you'll notice I just copied that. That's my new sign, Maxfield. I just took the gold triangle. Anyway, next time you drive by, you'll see it looks just like the wine bottles. Okay, so then this was, again, you saw this picture from a distance in that other picture of Hiram Maxfield, but we're going to get into more detail about the winery now. Maxfield's winery building enhancements under construction. Picture was taken in the 1880s. That's when they're building that building on Clark Street. This is a little something about Denison. So at the time when Hiram Maxfield was starting his winery, his son was of age now. Denison, so those are the two Maxfields that are kind of famous. Hiram really concentrated on the bank. Denison concentrated on the winery. And then this is a little thing out of some memoirs from him during this period, another development that was had great effect on Naples, and the young lad, Danny Maxfield, was happening, namely the beginning of grape culture and vineyards. Edward A. McKay introduced the first grapes commercially. Hiram in 1858 established the first Maxfield wine cellars, what we know is about that time, to Naples in 1848. Oh no, so first, yeah, we did 8 years before Denny was born. Thereafter, the new industry and new varieties spread rapidly. Concord's in 1861, Delaware's in 1856, Brighton's 1873, Niagara's 1882, Elvira 1873, Iona 1833, those were all Dutchers 1877, Ives. So, to name a few. The Cadalba was one of the very early being in this area in 1830, and the Isabella, now little known, was the mainstay for 50 years, being introduced in 1823, but became subject to mildew. This made a great impression on the young lad and was to be a major interest of his life. So really, Denny's the one that really got the winery going. And that's why it says the D.H. Maxfield Winery. So that first picture I showed you was just this piece. This picture was taken probably around 1890, 1900, and you can see how he expanded. And he's the one that actually cornered the market. Over in Buffalo. So in 1882, Hiram Maxfield switched his focus from selling grapes to selling wine. Well, that's not true, but with his son Denison. Denison focused on it. He built a new brick building on Clark Street and established the Maxfield Wine Cellars. It was closed due to Prohibition in 1920, and it was sold to Wigner's after Denison's death in 1930. So I've seen pictures of this being called the Wigner's Winery, but really it's the D.H. Maxfield Winery. And we'll get more into what happened during Prohibition. I will put a section on that. So then, anyway, this talks about the wine cellar and the history of the old wine, and talks about Denny, and pretty much everything I just told you. I try to make each of these slides stand on their own. So Maxfield Wine Cellars, this was from the Geneva Advisor. So there was a visit here, so more than half this. So when the trains finally went in between here and Middlesex, they actually allowed like an excursion on the train for the business people in Middlesex and Rushville. They took the train to see what was going on in Naples because they could now, and of course they gave a tour of the Maxfield Winery because that was a big thing to go see. And so it says here he has rare wines, 12 years old. This was actually a report from it's from Geneva. So the train went from Geneva, not Middlesex, from Geneva to Naples. So it was a really rainy day. They didn't know if any of the business people from Geneva would actually show up. They all did. They all showed up. And they took the train for the first time from Geneva to Naples. And so that they had a whole 2 days of planned events down here for the Geneva business people when they got off the train. And of course, one of the big ones was the Maxfield Winery. And so he said, the commentator from Geneva was really impressed with the Maxfield Winery. He has rare wines 12 years old. Let us quote his business card. Our wines are made from the choicest, ripe, hand-sorted grapes without the addition of coloring or flavoring matter of any nature whatsoever. It sounds like one today. They are guaranteed to contain absolutely nothing foreign to the grape except standard granulated sugar. They're also warranted to be of the vintage named. Now, if you look at these Naples Valley wine cellars, you notice this symbol here in the middle. It didn't say Maxfield wine anywhere, but this actually is an M, a D, and an H.
Yeah.
So it's Hiram, Denison, Maxfield. And it's on all, like even this wine tasting glass that I have here, which is really precious, because the only thing I really have that's from actually Naples Valley, it has that same logo on it, and it's a trademark. So that he trademarked that's their initials. So that was that. Okay. And again, there you can see the Grape House, 1874, right here. These were all Hiram Maxfield's graperies, which was Denison really running that. And then again, 1904. This whole area here, D.H. Maxfield. So this was definitely, that's what took place. Here are grape vines, business, commercials, and whatever. So at the Naples Valley Wine Center, found 10,000 grape trays, the right kind of the right prices, also empty barrels and kegs. So these are just some ads that I found about it. But this was the safe that was used there to store all the money he was making. That's actually still there today if you go take a tour of the woodworking shop. So the other interesting thing, this is a picture of the 3-horse cart I mentioned. These are the grape trays in this case, and there's one after another there. And there's a guy standing here. And I had seen this picture with other people, because when the Maxfield's family visited me at the inn, they brought a different picture. I thought, that's weird. There's a different picture with exactly the same picture. Look, it's the same. So we know who this is. So this, actually in this picture, the Maxfield's kids told me this is Denison, this is Hiram Jr., this is their mother, because at this point, Hiram Maxfield Sr. had just passed away. She's in mourning, and we don't know who he is. So,
Well, explain why they need 3 horses.
so the reason they needed 3 horses was because they would bring a lot of casks of wine up to Buffalo. And there were a lot of hills, and they had to get up Clark Street for one. And so they needed the extra strength of the 3 horses. And so apparently the Maxfields had these special carts made that the horses could pull. That's what I've heard. But you can see here what happened. I thought for a minute maybe somebody photoshopped him in. But then I noticed this guy's head's changed.
Yeah.
So they went and got him, and then they all posed. So this was like a first candid, that was this. There's no such thing as candids, but back in those days. The other thing worth noting is that in my Maxfield Inn today, there are 1,800 bottles of Maxfield wine still in the wine cellar. You can see them there. They're all head to toe, head to toe, head to toe. So that's why I have like an interest in what's going on here at the wineries. Okay, now let's talk about Widmer's, not about Maxfield's. This was an ad of Widmer's, but you can see that this building actually is in a lot of the Widmer's pictures. It actually started out being a wood building. This is a brick building, and that becomes very important when we see it in a few minutes. This then later became that, because there's the door. And so this was actually, again, the Wigner wine cellars founded by John Jacob Wigner in 1888, came to Naples with his family from Switzerland. The first Wigner's wine cellar has been remodeled into the present Swiss Chalet. This is the first Wigner wine cellar. Wines were named after the grapes they represent. The wine cellars were made in the Wigner's family until 1961. So you can go see that today. That's all that's left of this. So this is from his, I just summarized his memoirs. So John Jacob Wigner, that's this guy in the picture there, was born in Hausen, Switzerland on January 1st, 1852. He was the youngest of 7 children. His father was a highway commissioner for 39 years. His mother ran the family farm, because I guess the father really wasn't up to it. He learned farming at an early age. His brother Fred, a wagon maker, moved to Naples, New York in 1871. John Jacob wanted to be a smith, a blacksmith, and carriage designer, not a farmer, which is what his family wanted him to become. He was an apprentice at Mr. Fry's blacksmith shop back in Switzerland. Then he trained in a carriage shop, helping to build the iron framework. So he wasn't interested in grapes or anything like that. He married Lisette Seeberger on December 9th, 1873. He bought a blacksmith shop in Hausen, where he was born, in 1874. Fred, his brother, persuaded him to come to Naples in 1882. They sailed in steerage into New York City, and apparently she got really sick because she was pregnant. It took 3 weeks to get here. Then took trains to Corning and Atlanta. Their arrival in Naples was a terrible disappointment. His brother was poor with no credit because he misused his credit. That's why he couldn't get any credit. It wasn't because Maxfield wouldn't give him any money. At first, John Jacob was denied credit also, but that changed. And he even goes on to say that it changed to the point where people were throwing money at him. He began as a blacksmith and moved into a near house on Mill Street. So what I mean near house is it couldn't fit it. So he had a blacksmith. He actually worked in the blacksmith shop, probably the Griswold one across the street there. That in the last set we showed a picture of it burned. It was right almost where the one just burned now. And when I say he lived on a house near Mill Street, he actually lived on a house in Mill Street near your house, where the water went under the street. And he said it was so moist. His wife was getting, everybody was getting sick because it was so damp because the water from the aqueduct that went to the mill ran under his house because it ran down the ground and then came back up under the road. So they moved. But he was actually, so he began the blacksmith. He then moved to West Avenue, which is now where their homesteads are, and bought 12 3/4 acres to grow grapes. Because at that time, everyone was making so much money on grapes, he thought maybe I could do better making grapes. So he planted 7 acres of grapevines in 1883. He wanted to work part-time as a blacksmith and part-time in his vineyard. One for shoe in each camp. He had the homestead built in 1885, which is the white one. In 1887, he gave up blacksmithing. But then when the grape prices fell, it did not pay to ship them to New York City anymore. So after a while, it was no longer worth being in the grapery business. So as a child, back on the farm, he had pressed grapes. So he decided I can make some wine, and he made 280 gallons. He sold them to a guy in Rochester for like $1 a gallon. In 1887, he built his first wine cellar. He bought all of Martin Rowland's winemaking equipment, and in 1888, Wigner wine cellars were established. So even though it just says 1888, that's what it took for him to come here. It's quite an ordeal. And then this is some of the early pictures. So this was actually in the Rosetta Stone. So this is about 1890. Wigner's on the right. This is his cellars. Granby's Produce Building's on the left. So he didn't own any of this. He just owned from there up. He owned that side of the street up the hill. Wigner Wines with John Jacob came to Naples in 1882 with administrator's brother. In 1882, he bought the first plot of land. In 1888, John Jacob borrowed more money, renovated the grape house by adding a brick facing. Again, that's going to become important. And established the Wigner wine business. In 1895, he further expanded the building by building the brick cellar. In 1905, he purchased the land next to Lehigh Valley Siding and converted the existing warehouse and built on the site and stores to continue to grow. In 1915, Wigner bought the Kenny Basket Factory and used the building and land to expand his winery. So it just took right off. So here's a picture of his family. And you can see later, these are, again, his kids. But here he is with his wife. This picture was taken in 1892. So that's the answer, Blanche, because the picture from Mr. Combs where he had the exact same setup. The same carpet, the same background, the same.
Right.
So it turns out 1892. And so it looks like in 1892, Mr. Luther was taking pictures of all the people doing vineyards or wineries or graperies. So anyway, that's where the picture came from. So he had 3 kids. This is Will. I thought it was a girl. I thought maybe, but anyway, this turns out to be a boy. And that's Will. He ended up taking over the winery later as the president. So that's his family. Again, I'll go through a couple pictures here. You can see how things start to expand. The trains are now in. It's about 1900. And then, then he expanded the roof on here. By the way, oh, that's good. This is the old homestead. It's still there. That's the one he actually planned the basement. So on the Thrall house here on Mechanic Street has a double floor base, double high ceiling cellar, and people say, oh, that was because they brought the carriages in with slaves, but no, that's not what it's for. It was for the grape, because Mr. Thrall did grapes too, so you needed the extra high ceilings. He also made whiskey, and so an interesting thing though, Mr. Thrall down the street, he was a teetotaler. He was part of the temperance movement, and he felt guilty after a while and decided that maybe he shouldn't be making wine, and then he stopped. But anyway, there's but the other thing I found, when I went through the mill looking for more information, and there's just boxes and boxes of stuff, I found the grape account. Did I read them? Did I have myself? Okay. And so in here is 1919 to 1920 grape account. This is the Widmer's record book on where they bought all their grapes from, what kind of grapes they bought, and how many tons of grapes they bought. So I went through and I made this chart. So these people are all people that grew grapes in Naples that sold to Wigner's in 1919. Again, 1919, what's really interesting about 1919 is it's the year before Prohibition. 1919, January 1st, 1919 is when Prohibition started, which means they couldn't make wine anymore. But they had a year of, and I'll get into this in a minute, but they had a year of sabbatical, which means they couldn't sell any wine in 1920 on January 1st. So this shows you when it was at its peak before Prohibition, how many tons of grapes were being made. So if you look here, pounds of grapes, 200,000 pounds of grapes, which is 200 tons of grape, or 100. No, that's just one person. So I didn't do the whole total. So anyway, so it was a lot of grapes. Because this right here is 200,000 grapes just from it. And the other interesting thing is, I saw that he's buying his grapes from D.H. Maxfield. Matter of fact, Mr. Wigner's biggest supply at his peak of making wine was buying his grapes from Mr. Maxfield, his competition. And so you can see how this is. And then I'll get into a slide in a little more. So these are all the suppliers. So these are the people that come to us and ask us, my family had a vineyard, and we were growing grapes, and we was going into wine. This is where Wigner's bought them from. And it's all in this book, and there's so much information. Okay, so Prohibition hit. I just started that already. This I took from your thing. Lips that touch liquor should not touch ours. And this is, the pouring the wine down.
That looks like it's.
So again, they had 1 year grace period. So 1920, Prohibition nearly crippled the Naples Valley grape and wine industry. You can only imagine. With all those people getting their money from selling grapes, right before it crashed. John Jacob Wigner and many of the German and Swiss growers believed that it would not last, since the nation was built by immigrants that used wine as a regular food item. So a lot of them didn't believe it was going to go on. Prohibition brought bootlegging as a major operation in Naples. Maybe some of you guys know this. I mean, I started digging into this, I'm like, whoa, this is kind of cool. And you wouldn't believe all the stuff I found about that. Rhine Street got its name because when so many families from the Rhine River area in Germany immigrated to Naples, they had bought 10 to 20 or 30 acres on the west hillside overlooking Canandaigua Lake. In the 1920s, the Rhine Street grape growers were of the names Reisenberger, Bader, Schenk, Mayer, Eckenberger, Kirkmeyer, Glickert, Steinmetz, which I got to work with, Traum, Rechtenwald, Fox, Gloucester, Cleveland, Donner, and Pows. They were the ones that had places on Rhine Street.
Oh, yeah.
They had to sell grapes to survive during this time and leverage the local train service in Naples for this. So they were still trying to sell their grapes. The grapes that were not sold were made into homemade wine. On Friday and Saturday nights, there was a steady stream of cars on Rhine Street to purchase the illegal but excellent homemade Naples wines. You can't legislate good wines out of existence anymore. So the Rhine Street grape growers survived Prohibition and were in good shape when they entered the post-Prohibition era. Unlike most other vineyards, nearly half in the Naples Valley were gone. So we'll get to that in a minute. So what did Wigner's do during Prohibition? John Jacob Wigner decided to stay in business. He received a license from the federal government to procure sacramental and medicinal wines. In 1912, he added unfermented grape juice to his product lines. He also added other fruit juices like apple juices for sale. He created a wine tonic that sold well because of its name. It had a legal amount of alcohol, which was like 2%. He added cooking wine, wine jellies, wine syrups. On January 1st, 1924, John Jacob passed the company over to his 3 sons, so he did that during Prohibition. Again, Wigner survived through Prohibition and was able to hit the ground running when the Prohibition was repealed in 1933. So this was one of his old labels, and this is one of his grape juice bottling things. So what did Maxfield do during Prohibition? Well, the thing that I realized is Maxfield also had a bank, versus Wigner really didn't have much choice than to figure out what to do. But Maxfield basically, they stopped winemaking and sold most, if not all of their grapes to Wigner's. So in this book, I can see what happens between 1990 and 1919 and 1920. Because in 1920, they're not going to be making wine out of the grapes anymore because they can't sell them on January 1st. So you can see what happened. So tons of Maxfield grapes sold to Wigner. So in 1919, 105 tons of Maxfield grapes were sold to Wigner. In 1920, he sold 169 tons to Wigner. So since he wasn't making wine himself, which is about half of it, he basically sold all of his grapes that he had to Wigner. what it looks like. So the other thing they did is they changed their names in 1930. This Maxfield, it was called the Naples Valley Wine Cellars. Now it became the Naples Valley Cellars and Vineyard Incorporated. And then in 1934, again, they changed their name to Maxfield Wine Cellar. So all the bottles that have the Maxfield label are all from 1934 are newer. And it says right here, with changing conditions, the properties were incorporated in January 1930 under the name of, that's where I got it from, which operated inactively, maintaining a closed plant during Prohibition. The vineyards of choice varieties were maintained under careful cultivation during this period. So he kept the vines of the special grapes going, and he was selling things to Widmers, but he was not selling anything, because Maxfield couldn't do that too, being a politician. So then John Jacob Widmer's new house, he built this during, I guess, just before Prohibition. That's the one that, the beautiful house that just sold. That's their family, at least there's him and his wife, and there's some people in the car, that's not his sons. And then this is just, again, these are from the Rosetta Stone. This is John Jacobs Widmer's wife. Of course, I had the word Lizette, because nobody really did tell you what her name is until back then it didn't matter, I guess. But Lizette in the grape packing house. So she actually worked with the ladies in there. Prohibition ends at last. And then this is people celebrating, and now the wine industry has started up again. I noticed that this looks a lot like my wine cellar.
Those are the three brothers right there on the left.
Yeah, right.
Will.
Well, this is Will.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Frank and Carl.
Frank and Carl. That's what that picture's supposed to be, right? That was like one of their ads.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so then Will took over again. His father, John Jacob, he went by Jacob, but I call him down here, passed the family in 1924 or 23 or whatever. So that his sons passed the business. But William Wigner is the one who really then took it to the next level. So again, he was born in 1893. He was the third son. His other brothers became salespeople. He became the president. He graduated from Naples High School and went to the Royal Wine College in Geisenheim, Germany to study winemaking. Will became one of the best wine tasters in America. He could tell the year the wine was made and the area where the grapes were grown. After wine college, he went on a 3-year wine tasting tour to the wine districts of Germany, France, Spain, Austria, and Germany. Will took over the family wine business in 1933, so I guess they gave it to the sons, and then he took over the business in 1933. He developed a unique sherry wines using the methods that he had learned while in Portugal and Spain. Those are the thousands of gallons of sherry wines were aged on the rooftops of the wine cellars on West Avenue. The Wigner sherry wines were as good as the European ones at a third of the price. You can imagine that things were good for the Wigners. In 1950, Will developed a mild wine using the Niagara grapes. He used a secret process to capture the fruity flavor of the grape without losing its clear white color. Niagara grape wine, and Hazlitt still sells it as Niagara. I mean, they still make it. It soon accounted for 50% of the sales, and is still sold by Hazlitt still. Okay, this is just another picture. This is Elmer Bursky or something in Gothenburg, Gloucester. There is a famous guy that took care of the grapes, and his granddaughter actually stayed at the inn. I've got to do some research on him. Wigner wine barrels in the 1930s. This one, again, the Lehigh Valley Station. You can see how the cellars just keep getting bigger. So this one was down here, then he added another floor, and then he made the other one at an angle, then he caught this one up, and made the other one flat. Things just kept growing over there. And then, see again, you can see how this became a flat roof there. This was still here, though, the original cellar. And then, when Denison died in 1934, his son really had Hiram Jr. really had no interest in anything the Maxfields had. He wasn't really interested in the bank, wasn't really interested in the grape stuff. He really kind of left town. He should have given it to his daughters. His daughters were the business people, the Maxfield Denny's daughters. He had 4 daughters. But the son was just, everything that he wasn't the guy that should have taken over the business. And if it was today, he would have given it to Mary and the girls, and Maxfield would still be on the bank down there and everything. But anyway, that was too bad that they didn't do that back then. So Denison Maxfield died in 1934. Widmer's buys the Maxfield wine cellars in 1941. Hiram sold out. And this is actually taken down in my basement. See, it says Widmer's wine cellars, and it also says Maxfield's port. I have a case of wine in there. Anyways, this just talks about how he bought it. And also, the Widmers bought the mill property, because this is a slide when I did the talk on the mill, 1930. And this all becomes really important. And again, you can see this is the same picture. probably 1940s, because it also talks about war bonds and stuff on the box. And you can see the seals have just cracked, but they're all still full. And then again, there's just another picture of the cellars. I already showed you those. That's the barrels up on the roof, a guy testing them there, the sherry. I just can't imagine how much weight that is. Me as an engineer, I think to myself, that's crazy. But he made it, I guess, work. So then what happened was, John, the Wigner fire, 1943, costliest fire in Naples history sweeps Wigner plant Saturday. A power plant, the grape juice building, and one wine cellar with contents of machinery and supplies destroyed in the morning blaze. Loss largest in Naples history. So it started at about 15 o'clock Saturday morning. Night watchman Mr. Retta heard an unfamiliar puff sound. Investigation revealed that the fire had broken out of the steam dryer over the boiler room where tartrate bearing material vital to the war effort were being dried. Turns out that the tartrate comes from something from the grapes that they can get, and if you impregnate it into metal, steel, it helps with bearings and lubrication. So they were actually using a byproduct of grapes for the war effort. And so that caused this fire. And then you can see here, I just want to show you the picture of where things were. So this was the cellars, and this was the main factory plant, bottling plant. Because in this picture, you can see there's the cellars and there's the cellars. There's like nothing left of it right here. So there's the door, there's the door. So it took out this whole building. You think it's a brick building, but yes, but it was made out of wood. They just put brick face on the front of it. So it really burned down. That's why they had to make it into a Swiss chalet, because there really wasn't much left of it. And then this is that bottling plant. As you can see, that huge building right here. It's almost like looking at 9/11. You just get the car, that's all that's left of it. So it was quite a fire. It was absolutely devastating. There you can see this picture where I need to go back. So anyway, so then we move into the prisoner of war camp. So Wigner promised his employees he would keep them employed and that he would rebuild, and he promised them their jobs and he promised them everything, and he delivered. So he rebuilt the factory, everybody stayed employed, and they got through it. And it also said that he used the Maxfield Winery because he had bought it. He used a lot of the equipment there because that wasn't destroyed. He wasn't using it, he was just using it for building for storage. But now we have all the equipment, so he turned that equipment on in the meantime, and he used the mill. And the mill saved him because he could put a lot of storage of wine in there while he rebuilt his factory. So those two things actually really paid off in the end. So the prisoner of war camp, I'm almost done, by the way, sorry. A lot of stuff. So the prisoner of war camp also took place over there. On August 1944, during World War II, there was a German prisoner of war camp at the Wigners. This was built here due to the large German-speaking people in Naples, and because there was plenty of work to be done in the vineyards. So there you can see how it's set up. And one of the buildings are still used there by the Grove Boys, but the rest of them aren't. There's a lot of information on this too. So I actually managed to find all the blueprints down in Blanche's old archives down in the library about what all these buildings were. So these were the actual places where they slept. 40 men per shack with 5 shacks. They had the showers, hot and cold, for 12 at a time. They had latrines, 24 toilets. This was the infirmary. The guards' quarters, they had 35 men, and the kitchen and mess hall could hold 200 men, and that's what's there. So anyway, so this is just what I just said. The first POWs, which, this is interesting. The first POWs were of the North African campaign from Rommel's elite African Corps. They were some of Germany's top soldiers capturing during a winning German war efforts. It was early in the war. They were arrogant, unwilling to work, and sometimes hostile. So that wasn't the story I heard about what was going on in the camp, but that's true. Then in 1945, the second group of German soldiers arrived. Imagine the other ones got shipped out. They were captured during the Normandy campaign, so I thought maybe they were local German people, but no, they were actually from the war. Normandy campaign consisted of some young and some old soldiers. The war was not going well for Germany then. These POWs were happy to be alive and safe in the USA. They were cooperative and willing to work. So then later, a group of Italian POWs also lived at the camp for a short time. They were bussed in from other POW camps when needed in the vineyards. So the other thing is this is just a sketch of the 10-foot barbed wire fence that went around them. And then this picture is a picture of some of the POW people collecting grapes, working in the vineyards. And then under Will's leadership, the Wigner wine grew exponentially until he retired and sold the Wigner winery to a Rochester investment group in 1961. And in 1961, 9RT French company bought the winery. Thus ended the family ownership of nearly 100 years, and that's Will when he retired. And then I'm almost looking at my last slide. So Finger Lake grape varieties, okay, have in the past gained an undeserved negative reputation with the wine snobs, but are currently beginning to win top awards in major wine competitions. They often go unnamed and acknowledged in popular software table wine blends. We would like to see these grapes be appreciated for delicious fruity flavors, but so this is trying to read the resurgence of the grape industry after the 90s, because things weren't, going so great. Things started going down after Wigner sold. Or after, French did a lot, RT French, they built the factory up more, but lately, as you know, things have been going down. Their fruit flavors were much admired in the 19th century, a time when fresh fruits were seasonal, unlike today when you might grumble at the price of green seedless grapes in our supermarket. So, bottom line is, and then I just Googled, okay, so where's the wineries in the Finger Lakes now? And it's kind of sad. So this would probably have two. I found one that had two, so it had Inspired More and Hazlitt's, and Penn still has a lot. But I took a ride around Seneca Lake. Man, it is beautiful with wineries. So we need to do something to bring that back. Anyway, that's the end of that.